Welcome to this week's devotional. My name is Nick, and I'm the associate pastor here at Fort St. John Alliance Church. Do you ever feel like you've taken a risk for God and for His kingdom? And yes, I'm talking about the kind of risk that puts your reputation on the line, that puts your status maybe, or your pride, or how comfortable you are on the line for Jesus. Because it's clear throughout Scripture that Jesus calls us to be in uncomfortable places and spaces, to be willing to forsake our possessions, our friends, even our family for Him, right? For the sake of God's kingdom. And we see throughout Jesus' life, that is probably the best expression of it, of being willing to sacrifice and give everything for God. But it didn't just start with Jesus. And so for today's devotional, we're going to turn back to Genesis 22. And the story up into Genesis 22 is that Abraham has made a covenant with God, right? Abraham has said, yes, you will be my God and I will obey you. And God has said, great, I'm going to make you into a great nation and make you spread throughout the land. But the interesting thing is that Abraham and Sarah are barren. They cannot have children. And so this is a big promise that God has made to them because they're also quite old in age. And eventually we see God is faithful, and they have their one and only son, Isaac. And this is where our story picks up in Genesis 22. So this is what the passage reads. Some time later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So they go and they travel up, bring out everything they need for the sacrifice. And then in verse 7, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Father, yes, my son, Abraham replied. The wood and fire are here, Isaac said. But where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And then we see Abraham finds this ram that God has provided for the offering, and God reaffirms his covenant with Abraham that he's going to make him into a great nation and cover the land. And so, again, to kind of go through Abraham's story up until this point, he hasn't really been faithful. Even when God makes the covenant with him in Genesis 12, he says, leave your family behind and go to this land that I call you. And Abraham says, sure, great, but let me bring my nephew Lot, which is his family. So he doesn't listen to God initially. And then we also see that Abraham goes into major cities or major nations. And because he's scared because his wife is beautiful, that people are going to kill him, he says, oh, she's actually just my sister. And so these leaders of these towns and cities take Sarah as their wife, and then God curses them, and there's problems happening, and then they go to Abraham and say, hey, dude, why did you lie to us? Why did you deceive us? You should have just told us that this was your wife. We didn't want to anger your God. And so, up until this point, Abraham really hasn't been faithful. There's been significant moments where he could, fear God, put his trust in God, and he falls short. But here we have it. God has given him his son, his one and only son, at a very old age. And God asks Abraham, are you willing to give up your son for me? Is it God or is it Isaac who fulfills the covenant? And even though this was his only son, whom he loved dearly, he demonstrates through this action that the covenant is fulfilled through God. It's not through his love of his kid. It's through God that this will happen. And we could debate what Abraham thought was going to happen if he actually did sacrifice his son, or how God would have provided, but that's not the important piece here. Right? There are times in our lives as followers of Christ where we have decisions that we can make or we cannot make. Decisions to put something on the line for God or to do nothing. And sometimes it works out well in Abraham's case where he says, yeah, I will submit this to you. But that's not always the case, right? The story of Job shows that. Sometimes we follow Jesus and everything goes wrong. Even Jesus' life, he submits to God and he loses his life. However, the important thing, and the thing I want to encourage you, is when we say yes to what God is calling us to do, whether it's good, whether it's hard, whether there's a lot on the line or little on the line. When we say yes, when we take that step of faith and obedience, God is so faithful and he is so good. He will give you more of this new life that Jesus died for you and I. He will give you more of his presence, more of his spirit, more joy and hope and peace, more faith. We experience more of this new life that God has promised us when we say yes to him. When we take a step of faith for God, we don't leave empty-handed. He will provide. He will bless us with more of his presence, even though it may not always look the way that we hoped it would. So go out into your week, even if it's a small step or a big step, say yes to God. Say yes to what he's calling you to, and he is faithful. Grace and peace to you.